Good. Now that we are there, also very warm welcome from my side to our 10th conference. And as Melina said, it's a happy birthday. Our young lady, the conference, has gotten 10 years old. And so I want to use this time to actually look back a bit. Where did everything start? And what did we focus on over the last years to put that into context and provide an outlook as to where we are heading as a conference, but especially from a product perspective. Now, if I look back to where everything started and I try to find a singular image that does it, then it might be this young dynamic gentleman. This was Matthias in 2009, and he was then a self-employed software developer. He was very entrepreneurial in his spirit, and so he issued a press release himself in July 2009, announcing to the world that a monitoring add-on had been born. In its version 1.0, it was available to the world, open source, and it was called Checkmk. And that essentially formed the nucleus is why we are all here today. And then Lars joined, Andreas joined, many other colleagues joined over the years and started to develop the Raw edition and the Enterprise edition initially with you in a very close collaboration. And that close collaboration, many of you actually also funded this early development, to tie that bond. In 2014, they decided to launch the first customer conference. It was also in Munich, roughly 100 participants, and I'm glad to see that some of you were here and have been here ever since, which I think is the most important piece of that. And so then, 10 years down the line, this is where we are together today. Same city, different venue. And it's also a second anniversary because it's the first time where we not only do a European conference, it's also the first year where we do a smaller US conference that will be in Atlanta on the 27th of June. Now, my personal journey with Checkmk actually started a bit later. It started around time of conference number 4, that was 2018. And at that time, the team had grown to 16 people, typically consultants and developers, largely. They built up a business with already 1,400 customers, which is actually a lot for this small company, and many, many more raw users out there. And so over the next years, what we try to do is build up the organization to have the innovation power to take Checkmk into the future. And so by now, we are roughly a 160 people organization. We serve 4,500 customers worldwide in Europe and in the US and in 50 other countries. And our key focus as a team is to fulfill the mission that I talked about last year, and that is in the end, bringing visibility into your hybrid IT. Independent of whether you have your workloads in your data center or your public cloud, or we see most companies having both of these, we want to provide you with one integrated platform which does that, and that's Checkmk. Now, when I look a bit what we worked on over the last years, or the features and works, then you can essentially cluster them in 4 very broad categories. And that is working on a great user experience for beginners and experts, re-architecting and further extending Checkmk to enable modern monitoring for this hybrid world, for these 2 worlds coming together, working on extensible interfaces, so APIs, to develop, so extend Checkmk as a developer, and to automate the monitoring and the configuration, and lastly on securing and further making the platform scalable. Yeah? Let me talk a few minutes to look into these as to what happened over the last years in terms of highlights. And the first part is the user experience. And so our user experience, I think, got a relaunch with version 2.0, where we basically completely revamped the user interface and how you navigate Checkmk to the look and feel that you know today. We complemented that with expanding the dashboarding, both in terms of all the visualization options that you have, but also over time offering more and more off-the-shelf dashboards, such as the Kubernetes dashboard that you see here. And then roughly 2 years ago, we took the next step and built up an in-house UX team to focus on usability in the details. And we've done, I think, quite a number of improvements in 2.2 and now in 2.3. And as you see later on in this afternoon and tomorrow, this is really one of our key focus areas going forward to make the day-to-day work easier for you, make that powerful feature set more accessible. Now, the second part of these broad categories is about enabling modern monitoring for the hybrid world. The starting point is obviously that we have simply the monitoring coverage, the Checkmk plugins and special agents to address those. And so, as you know, we invested a lot in AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud monitoring, but also in monitoring basically all major Kubernetes distributions out there, from plain vanilla Kubernetes to OpenShift to VMware Tanzu to all the managed offerings from the public cloud providers. Then we worked further and basically imported one key concept that many of these cloud-native technologies are using, and that were the labels, which I think by now have become a key feature of Checkmk, complementing the original concept of tags. We went further and worked on the agent architecture. We essentially re-architected that to become a modern TLS-based architecture, and also complemented now the pull mode of fetching data with the push mode, which enables you to also work with agents over the public internet on very security-conscious environments. And lastly, we worked a lot in addressing another feature set essentially of these cloud-native architectures, very dynamic loads. Yeah? VMs being spun up and spun down, pods emerging and disappearing, so ephemeral loads. Now this is basically an architectural foundation for that hybrid world. The second, a bit associated trend is, you know, these sayings, software eats the world, or every company is becoming a software company. And that is essentially, most companies have now built up development teams to build up digital services, apps, digital customer experience. And with that, more and more value also goes into applications. And so over the last year, we worked a lot to release with this new version 2.3 major enhancement in application monitoring, to be able to better monitor the availability, the performance, but also the functionality of applications. And we did that with two different major initiatives. One was to completely revamp the web services monitoring by reworking the check HTTP. And secondly, by introducing a new product, an add-on product called Checkmk Synthetic Monitoring, which essentially tests the functionality of the application from an end-user perspective and monitors it in that way. We did that by working with Simon Megley, which you probably all know well by now, and mainlining and reworking his RobotMK project into integrating that into Checkmk. Now the next topic we worked on were the interfaces, the APIs. And the starting point for that was working on the new Check API, or agent-based API as we now call it, to essentially make a lot of the functionality to develop your own check plugins available as a stable external API. And that was all great, but we were still missing some pieces which you typically need for a check plugin, how you do metrics, how you define rule sets, etc. And now with 2.3, we went full circle and made basically all functionality you need to extend Checkmk on your own available as a stable external API, which means that if you build your Checkmk plugin based on that during an upgrade, that will remain fully stable because the API is stable. As you know, we also worked a lot on automating Checkmk by introducing a REST API and extending that over many versions now to be much more focused and extended in basically covering most of the configuration and monitoring functionality. And last year, we built on top of that a community project that many of you contributed to, the Ansible collection, which builds upon that REST API and makes many standard use cases available also for non-developers. Lastly, on that journey, we worked further on securing and increasing the performance of Checkmk with the check helper concepts and other concepts, introducing single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and other topics. Now, if I put all of these together and draw a very high-level picture, on the highest level that we can basically draw it for Checkmk, and I take 3 layers: infrastructure, application, and the user experience of an application. Then by now, Checkmk is essentially a very modern hybrid IT monitoring tool for infrastructure and infrastructure-related applications. And now we can also monitor the user experience of these applications for you. So it becomes, for the first time, a full stack view. And so where are we heading from that starting point? If I take 3 major slices in time, 6 months, 12 months, and 24 months, then within 6 months, which is actually a bit out of our ordinary release cycle, we do one major step, and that is taking all of what we have today, which is self-hosted, as you know, you host it yourself, and making that available as a service. And the reason for that is that we get more and more requests from customers who tell us, we as an enterprise have embarked on a cloud-first strategy. We want to consume all of our applications as a service. And for these customers, we want to have an answer that complements the existing setup. So in the future, you can now decide whether you want to self-host it or consume it as a service, depending on how your IT internally works. And that will become available before the end of the year. The second major step is 12 months, and that's sort of our general major release cycle. By that time, we will release the next major version, Checkmk 2.4. And that really focuses on the existing scope, making lots of improvements in all the aforementioned areas. And you will hear lots of that over the course of the next days. And then lastly, within the next 24 months, we want to take one more strategic step and close this one white space. On this map, it's the black space that remains here, and that is extending Checkmk to be better in monitoring custom applications. You can monitor them now from an end-user perspective, but it's a bit more complex to monitor a custom application from the inside, getting the metrics exposed from the inside of that application. And so the benefit is, or the good thing is, that over the last years, the industry has worked on standards, and one of the most predominant standard is the open telemetry standard to monitor applications. And so in the next year, already for the next Checkmk version 2.4, we will integrate an open telemetry collector into Checkmk, and then take the subsequent year to work on extending it to a new metrics backend, working on making querying more powerful in Checkmk, and building out the dashboard functionality. And with that, you then have a true full stack monitoring going forward, and you decide where you want to use it for. That's enough for the macro side of things. I will now hand over to Martin, who walks us through the details of the latest release. And I can only say thank you for coming here. I look forward to talking to many of you over the next 2 days, and have a great conference. Thank you.